The 80s, that wonderful time when things were still a little bit unashamedly weird, goofy and zany, and as a side note, we were treated to some of the most distinctly captivating graphic design that modern culture has ever known. Be it a crumpled paperback copy of Stephen King's Christine or a shiny plastic VHS copy of Beetlejuice, the 80s were a tactile time when you could hold a tome of horror in your hands and somehow not feel out of place. It was a time shortly after the doors of horror were blown wide open by the 1970s and cinematic greats like John Carpenter and Tobe had already sown the seeds of their franchise terror. It was a time when being a weirdo or a wastoid was expected and geeks, zeeks, freaks, sarcastic motorheads and headbanging was all the rage. And it was a time when horror cinema had truly found its feet. Hello horror fans and welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch, as today we power up the Betamax and take a look at the top 5 scariest horror movies from the 80s. Roll the clip.
Garlic don't work, boys! I only want her death breath!
For the curious amongst you, that clip was from 1987's The Lost Boys, starring Kiefer Sutherland, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman amongst others, and is actually one of my favourite movies of all time. It also highlights a very important point with this list. It's going to be impossible for me to please everyone in this top 5, myself included. So much so that I even left out John Carpenter's The Thing because I figured I harp on it about too much. So just like how I keep my garlic, I'm keeping it fresh. Kicking off at number 5, The Dead Zone, 1983. And if you ask anyone worth their salt, they'll tell you that this is one of the truest cinematic interpretations of Stephen King's horror fiction to date. The Dead Zone, released in 1983, is based on the 1979 Stephen King novel of the same name and stars the legendary Christopher Walken as Johnny Smith, a school teacher who awakens from a coma to find that he has psychic powers. And one of the reasons that this film is so damn good is Walken's performance. He absolutely knocks it out of the park, and his portrayal of a supernatural character is so convincing that we almost forget we're watching paranormal horror. The Dead Zone was also directed by the 80s heavyweight of horror cinema, David Cronenberg, the man responsible for Scanners, Videodrome, and another horror classic that has definitely made this list. At first glance, The Dead Zone appears to be another bad carbon copy of King's fictional work, but it's so much more than that and confronts some pretty heavy themes that aren't usually found in horror. Granted, it's not the best example of Cronenberg's iconic body horror, but instead a slow-burning paranormal thriller jam-packed with atmospheric dread. Great stuff. Coming in at number 4, and I'd be a fool if I didn't have this one on my list purely for the fact that I don't want to piss off any Robert Englund fans. That's a whole horror show in itself, and then subsequently killed in real life. It gave birth to plastic reality featuring some of the most insanely entertaining special effects of the genre, and there's not much more to it really. Freddy Krueger is an 80s horror icon and just a straight up horror icon to boot. Wes Craven? Of course it makes this list. Swinging in at number 3, The Fly, 1986. Nothing says 1986 like Jeff Goldblum in a Brundlefly physical effects suit spewing corrosive vomit over John Getz's poor hands. And in my opinion, The Fly, directed by David Cronenberg and released in 1986, is quintessential 80s horror viewing, as well as being Cronenberg's most commercially and critically successful film to date. In it, he combines his fantastic use of physical body horror and gore with some of the most well-crafted and grounded characters in the genre. And also, it's Jeff frickin' Goldblum. You can't ask for much more. Loosely based on the classic sci-fi short story of the same name written by George Langeland, The Fly tells the tale of Seth Brundle, a scientist who has developed the technology to allow instantaneous teleportation. But of course, this is a horror film, and when Seth attempts to test the technology on himself, a common housefly slips inside the pod, and then we get Brundlefly. The script is incredibly tight, the pacing is second to none, and the insanely grotesque set pieces are some of horror cinema's most horrifyingly brilliant. Just watch the deleted monkey cat scene on YouTube and you'll get an idea of why The Fly is so brilliant in all its gory glory. We should all be afraid. Be very afraid. Next up at number 2, The Evil Dead, 1981.
Shut up!
We're gonna get you, not another peep. Time to go to...
And it wouldn't be 1981 without a Necronomicon and a blood-soaked Ash Williams, and a film that gave birth to one of the most dearly loved and charming horror franchises ever created. The Evil Dead works because it's weird, and it was an idea that spawned itself from the true spirit of the 80s. Do it yourself, and let's not give a sweet FA about what anyone else thinks. Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi were best friends as kids, and luckily for us, that friendship led them all the way to create this, 1981's The Evil Dead, as well as 3 more feature films and 3 TV seasons of Ash vs. Evil Dead, Chainsaw Hand and all. It doesn't matter if you love the Evil Dead universe or not, because the original 1981 film is just a fantastic horror showstopper in itself. It's a melting pot of every cinematic trope that works well together: the woods, teenagers in a cabin, a trapdoor, an evil demonic book, and an entire army of darkness, of deadites and monstrous trees. During production, Stephen King, after an advanced screening of The Evil Dead, called it the most ferociously original film of the year, and in that cemented its cinematic legacy as one of the most captivating horror franchises ever made. But there is one that takes the cake. Coming in at our number 1 spot, Aliens, 1986. I could spend an eternity trying to explain exactly why Aliens is so good, and I still wouldn't even come close to articulating it. Water is wet, Aliens is awesome. That's all there is to it. Yes, although 1979's Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, paved the way for the franchise and is a colossus of sci-fi horror in its own right, James Cameron's 1986 masterpiece is perhaps the best thing that the 80s could have ever given us. For a sequel to have this much impact is impressive in itself, but the fact that it is heralded as the greatest sequel of all time in the whole of cinematic history is a feat in and of itself. James Cameron had some absolutely massive shoes to fill for this film, and the production process was a completely separate horrific ordeal. Most of the crew attached to this film had worked on Ridley Scott's Alien and were fiercely loyal to the director, often causing trouble for Cameron and suggesting that the then 31-year-old director wasn't capable of producing a reasonable sequel. But for me, that's exactly what the 80s was all about. It was about stepping up in a brave new world and saying, nah, we can do you one better. And the result is this: Aliens. Sigourney Weaver at her best, Bill Paxton at his absolute best, Lance Henriksen, Michael Biehn, Paul Racer, xenomorphs, exosuits, perfection. Well, there we have it, horror fans. That's my list for the top 5 scariest horror movies from the 80s. What do you think? Why don't you let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I know you will. Before we depart though, let's read out some of your more creative comments from over the past few days. First up, Awkward Potato says, I don't know what to comment. I don't know what to say. Next up, John Barfield says, hey Jack, do you believe in witchcraft? Well John, I mean that's quite an expansive question to answer in just a few seconds, but if I have learned one thing in my short time on this earth, it's to never, ever piss off a witch. Unfortunately folks, on that note, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Just sticking around all the way until the end. If you're a fan of this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button as well as that subscribe bell, and we'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos, and until next time, you take it easy.